Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for being with us. Once again, we have with us today Mr. Desmond Ovbiagele, filmmaker, director, producer. And this is the Filmmakers Forum. For those who are probably joining us for the first time, the Filmmakers Forum is an activity organized by the Nollywood Studies Center. The Nollywood Studies Center is a unit of the School of Media and Communication of the Pan-Atlantic University, and it's a resource and research center which aims to contribute to the development of the industry, the film industry in Nigeria, that is. But like I said, we have here with us today, Desmond Ovbiagele. Desmond, thank you very much for making out the time to be with us. Desmond is a Nigerian filmmaker and director. His latest film, as I'm sure most, if not all of you are aware, was selected as the Nigerian entry for the best national international film at the Academy Awards, the Oscars. The Milkmaid was also nominated for various awards at the Africa Movie Academy Awards. Well, a similar thing occurred with his previous film, rendered to Caesar, which also won various awards at two forums, or on two platforms in 2014. In the 25th edition of FESPACO, it was selected to screen at the official competitions. It also won Best Original Screenplay, Best Actor in a Supporting Role. And the film of 2020, The Milkmaid, won Best Film in an African Language, Best Actress in a Supporting Role, Best Makeup, and Best Nigerian Film. Well, I'm sure, Desmond, that all of that must be very thrilling for you, being that that really was your second film. Okay, and well, we're going to talk about all of that. But let's get the ball rolling. Now, Desmond, you were previously an investment banker. You were in that sector for over a decade with Citigroup and Standard Chartered Bank. Why really did you leave banking to go into filmmaking? Banking, well, I think in those days, our parents would have told us to go for an established job in an established sector where you will be sure of your earnings. You left all of that to go into filmmaking, which, well, is particularly precarious here in Nigeria. What motivated you?
Well, thanks, Doc. Thanks for having me on this forum, and well done for all the work of Nollywood, Study Center. I think it's a fantastic platform.
Thank you.
Regarding my entry into filmmaking, as you rightly said, I worked in investment banking for several years, and the banking industry was very good to me. I was fortunate enough to, rise to various positions of, managerial levels in the various banks I worked for. I did, however, feel that there were aspects of myself that were unable to find full expression within the framework of the banking industry. And, as I got on in years, so to speak, it became increasingly important for me that those elements of self-expression should find a way to express, themselves. And the banking industry wasn't able to provide that platform for me. And these elements of self-expression were specifically in the creative industry, specifically in the film industry. So having given it a lot of thought, it became very clear to me that I had two choices: either to remain in the banking industry, and continue along that path, or to make a clean break and step out. As you said, yes, perhaps a precarious decision, given that the film industry, particularly in Nigeria, wasn't and still is not as developed as you'd like it to be to constitute an alternative career, vis-a-vis banking. But I believe that if things went well and I put in my best efforts and I was fortunate, perhaps I could actually make it an alternative career for myself. So with that in my head, in my heart, and in my hands, I stepped out and went to filmmaking.
Now, how really has it been for you? Because that move from banking to filmmaking, well, would have required some preparation. How did you, I mean, did you go to film school? Did you do an internship with others? Really, what's the process? Because I think there are many people who are probably facing that same choice or that same desire to want to go into filmmaking. And for many people, they don't move because they don't quite know how to go about it. What was your own experience? How did you make that move?
Well, I mean, curiously enough, I didn't go to film school. I know film school obviously is a tried and tested pathway for many to enter into the filmmaking industry. I didn't go down that path. And I think perhaps that was less about not having confidence in structured education, but more of perhaps, personal inclination and temperament. I think all my life, I've tended to learn outside of a structured environment. I've tended to learn on my own, even in secondary school. Taking EP exams and all that. I basically, got more traction on mileage reading on my own rather than attending classes and, listening to lecturers and all that. So again, it was just a personal inclination for me in terms of delving into this industry. And, I guess just learning by myself, learning on the job and watching a lot of films and trying to learn as much as I can. I think just on a personal level, my temperament seems more suited to that form of, education than perhaps a more structured approach.
Right. Good. Now, well, that I think, now between when you, this is just to really follow up a bit more on that point, between when you chose to enter the film industry and when you made your first film in 2014, how long did you then spend training yourself?
Well, even before I stepped out of banking, I mean, I guess perhaps subconsciously I had been ingesting a lot of the language of film just by watching films. I used to watch a lot of films. I didn't know I was going to go into filmmaking, but for whatever reason, I just found myself consuming films as a steady diet on a daily basis. And I think that helped, once I made the decision to step out, that helped to give me some inner confidence that I could have something to contribute in terms of filmmaking. And it was just a question once I stepped out in terms of, really doubling down in terms of the aspect of filmmaking I wanted to make my personal, mode of occupation, which happened to be writing and directing as well. I guess perhaps it also helped, maybe just mentally, that one of my parents happened to be in the creative arts, which was my mom, who happened to be a writer, and she had written several books. And I think perhaps that gave me some confidence that perhaps something had passed down genetically, from her to, when you step out into such a venture, you grab onto whatever straws that you can. And that was certainly one of the straws that I held on to. And perhaps I could make it in this very new territory for myself.
Well, I will come back to that because certainly it's actually one of my questions that there does appear to be something genetic there that has passed through the line. But let me hand you over now hand over the host for a moment to Professor Tony Ada. I need to switch to change connections here because this is messing me up. So Tony will take over for a moment while I just switch over. Tony, over to you, please.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me, Desmond. Yes?
Yes, can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to start this by sort of pursuing the same line of questioning that Dr. Ovbiagele was going before, but moving it a little forward. So let's begin to approach your first production. Okay, so you were sort of more or less self-teaching, or self-mentoring, from resources around you. So when you decided to do your first production, what relationships have you cultivated between yourself and people in the industry by that time?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I was basically an outsider. I'm not sure I'm not still an outsider, but I was very much the outsider at the onset. This was about 2011. Really didn't know anybody. But what I did do, by virtue of my investment banking background, I had made a few contacts in my capacity as a banker in the creative arts. So once I stepped out, I sought to leverage on those relationships as an entry point into the industry, essentially letting them know that, I had left banking, I was looking to sort of find my feet in the creative arts. And I'm sure a lot of them still saw me wearing my investment banker's hat and thought I was coming in to give them money for their projects. But I was saying, hey, that's not exactly the case. I have my own project I'd like to do. And I'd like you guys to please show me the ropes in terms of showing me the sort of cast, actors and actresses I can work with, the sort of crew I could work with as well. So it took a bit of time to, to get their heads wrapped around the fact that, okay, I wasn't coming in to finance their project. I was actually coming in to be one of them and to also look for financing, side by side with them. So that was sort of the way I entered into the industry, having not really known anybody, in the industry.
And what about the process of, sort of, because in your latest film, you wrote, produced, directed, I believe, yes? Yes. What about the rest of your crew? What was your process in terms of recruiting crew and recruiting cast?
Well, it's a step-by-step process. You talk to one person, you basically latch onto whatever foothold you can get in the industry, and you essentially try to use that to now, work your way into other people. So once, for instance, the very last project I did, the Milkmaid, once I had written the script, I reached out to, I think, my sound recordist on my former project and told him, hey, I have this script, I need to get some Hausa, acting resources in. And I approached him because he himself, is Hausa. And he now introduced me to some of the people who actually acted in the film. So it's a process where you use whatever resource you can, whether they are cast or crew, and try to reach out to other people through them.
Well, I think Dr. Ovbiagele is back now, so I'm going to hand this over back to him.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tony. Great. Now, just to let me go back to something you said a moment ago, the aspect of the funding. When you entered, people thought you were coming to provide funding. Access to funding is a major challenge for the Nigerian filmmaker. I am assuming that your background in banking would have been an advantage for you, but nevertheless, it still most probably was or has been a challenge. How have you dealt with this? And really, is your background, does it place you in a better position than many other filmmakers?
So far, I haven't found that it has. It hasn't been a hindrance, but I haven't seen it. I think where it helps is probably just on a personal level, giving me the tools to be able to articulate my vision to people who might want to invest or partner with me financially. But I haven't seen anyone give me money because I worked in Citibank or Standard Chartered Bank. That simply hasn't happened. What it has helped is maybe helped people perhaps impose some level of trust and confidence, to work with me because of the fact that I'm coming from a fairly structured environment, and they expect that I'll bring in some of the values, that have operated in, for well over a decade, and bring those into the project and trying to pitch to them, and they're hoping that, those sort of standards of quality control and excellence and due diligence are some of the things that I'll bring into the projects I'm presenting to them. So from that level, yes, perhaps that has helped, but it hasn't directly translated into me being able to attract money to my projects over and above what other practitioners in the film industry have been able to do. Probably less, actually. I've actually found it seems as if they find it easier to raise money for their projects than I found it for my projects. But that's the way it goes.
Okay, it's just that I was thinking that having that knowledge of the how do I put this, of what it involves, the whole thing of writing a business plan, of knowing the sector well, that perhaps that would have helped in terms of trying to say, well, these are the possibilities. That was the idea that I had.
Yes, and normally it would help and should help in an industry that was perhaps had a bit more structure to it, a bit more transparency, particularly in terms of available information and data that will enable potential financiers be able to take an informed decision, either to invest or to lend or whatever. But that is still very much work in progress in the Nigerian film industry. So, those sort of tools and approach are really more powerful and more effective. Once you have an industry that is structured to take advantage, of those tools, and of those resources. So it's very much work in progress. Right now, a lot of Nigerian films are funded. I'm talking. This is without prejudice to the work that Bank of Industry has done in the Nigerian film space. But with all due respect, Bank of Industry's input, compared to the sheer volume of output, that Nollywood produces on a year-by-year basis remains a fraction. So a lot of films in Nollywood continue to be funded, through informal means, through personal relationships, as opposed to structured financing via equity or debt.
Good point. Good point. I suppose this clearly is also tied to perhaps the inadequate structure of the distribution system. It's difficult, I suppose, to put forward a business plan if that aspect is not so clear. But with the recent improvements, I think that, well, slow, not too many, but there have been some, perhaps a creation of other platforms. You have now more cinema houses coming up. You have the OTT platforms, Netflix and the likes, and so on. And I think that now there are the business of aggregation. More people are taking that up. Do you think that this is helping? I mean, given the fact that, well, you have now been in the industry for going on close to 10 years now. Have you noticed an improvement in that between when you made your first film and when you did your second one? Has there been an improvement in the structure that you say is appreciable or not?
Oh, no doubt. I mean, there's clearly been an appreciable structure in terms of distribution and exhibition. To give an example, when I was doing my first film, I think film house cinemas only had one single cinema in the entire country. That was back in 2012. Obviously, it has grown in leaps and bounds since then, all around the country, in addition to other cinema franchises with Genesis and Silverbird. But, when I released my first film in I believe it got into cinemas in 2014, I think there was still just about 12 or 13 cinemas in the entire country. I don't know what the stats are on that right now, but cinema houses are just beginning to take a foothold and become the mainstay of exhibition for Nigerian films. When I did my first film in 2014, when I released my first film in 2014. So certainly from the standpoint of exhibition for cinema houses, that has certainly moved considerably from where it was in 2012. It still has a long way to go if you look at it vis-a-vis, obviously, the population of the country. But certainly there has been noticeable change from 2012. Yes. And in addition to that, you obviously have Africa Magic, which has constituted an additional option for filmmakers to monetize their investment in films by constituting a platform to show Nigerian films. So Africa Magic is there. and then you also have other iterations of that within the DSTV family, like Showmax. And then of course you have Netflix. Of course I haven't mentioned Iroko TV, which obviously has always been there, and obviously has expanded into RK1 and RK2, that are currently thriving on the DSTV platform right now. And then of course, as I said, you have Netflix, which has come up and has constituted another level for Nigerian filmmakers, and certainly another platform and avenue for them, to be able to exploit, their proprietary content, So there's definitely been a change, both on, as I said, distribution side and on exhibition in Nigeria. And, I think we're seeing the results in terms of, more filmmakers, more people, coming into the filmmaking industry and looking at it as a viable occupation, with these platforms, particularly with, international brand like Netflix, coming into Nigeria.
Great. We will come back to the point of distribution when we talk a little bit more about what's happening with the Milkmaid. But now I want to go back to something that came up earlier, the genes, the writing genes, as I say. Now, you said that the fact of your mom being an established writer, a well-known writer in the field, Helen Obiagele, for those who may not know, that perhaps was one of the things that encouraged you to go into that field. And it's noticeable that in both your firms, you have been the scriptwriter, director, and producer. Now, wearing 3 caps like that, isn't that rather challenging? That's on the one hand. The second one, I want to focus a bit more on the script writing, because really, is it correct, or would it be correct to say that you did get a lot of lessons from your mother, because that seems to be part of your strength, the aspect of actually writing and putting the script together?
Yeah, I think, when I stepped out, I didn't step out with immediate aspirations to be a director or even a producer, really. I really stepped out as a writer. And even whilst I was still in banking, I had started writing scripts. But of course, once you've written a script, the next logical step is to actually get it into production, And I think, perhaps that's where my investment banking background helps, because rather than, okay, I have a script, I'm looking for someone to help me produce it, the work of a producer is similar to, the tools that you use as a producer to actually attract resources to realize a script, was a process I was very familiar with. Our tools I was accustomed to using in the banking industry in terms of, doing your industry analysis, get a plan ready, being able to present the plan, being able to approach potential sources of financing, to put down money for the plan and all that, So it made sense once I had written a script, not to sit on my hands and start looking around for someone to produce it, but actually to take that further step, to step out and use the tools I was accustomed to using in banking to actually take the project to the next level. So when the producer's hat was perhaps a bit more natural than it would have been for me if I hadn't worked in banking and I was just a writer all my life. Having worked in banking, particularly not just banking, having worked in project finance, the mentality and the temperament to bring a project into fruition, I guess, was already there. The tools, from having the blueprint for a project to actually, making the project happen, was what I took away from banking and enabled me, I guess, step a bit more confidently into the role of producer. So that was, that was the sort of way I sort of made the transition from not just being a writer, but to also being involved in producing the projects that I had written. So that was that step from writer to producer. That was the way that cap came. The director cap came from, I guess, from the temperament of the writer. And I think any writer will tell you that, obviously, once you spend so much time, writing a script, you want your vision to be as faithfully realized and reproduced on screen possible. Now, if you just write a script and you sell it or you give it to a producer or a director, some amount of control, is taken away from you,
right.
and you don't really know to what extent your original vision will be faithfully adhered to in the final product. So because I hopefully I'm not a control freak, perhaps I am, but but I certainly wanted to ensure that whatever I had written was reproduced as faithfully on screen as I originally intended. And for me, that meant potentially stepping into or sitting in the director's chair, because that was the only way I was going to be 100% guaranteed that, hey, whatever eventually was produced was what you actually produced, and not what someone else said, okay, well,
Right.
nice job, but this is the direction which I prefer to take it. And I didn't want that.
Great, thank you. Now, just to announce to the House that please drop your questions. If you have questions for Desmond, please drop them in the chat box and we'll take them from there. Okay. Now let's come to The Milkmaid. I must tell you that I watched it and I loved it. Thank you very much. I know you shared that with me. Great film. I watched an interview of yours with one of the financiers for the film, and the point was made that you were actually aiming at having Oscar quality, an Oscar quality film. That was, you set your sights on that. Now, can you tell us a little bit about that? Why was that your target?
Well, for any film I set out to do, my overriding ambition is to ensure that my film can play anywhere internationally. That is, it's not a film made for video in Nigeria. It's not a film made for pay TV in Nigeria, which is good, and I still like the film to be exhibited there. But even if you took the film to a Netflix, even if you showed the film in a Warner Village Cineplex in Los Angeles or New York, the film can still stand shoulder to shoulder, quality-wise, both technically and creatively, with a Hollywood film, although it's made on a Nigerian budget. But so obviously that's a challenge, trying to achieve international quality with a sort of Nigerian type of budget. But nonetheless, that is my mindset, that is my framework, that is what I consider to be my contribution to the Nigerian filmmaking industry. That is where I believe Nigerian film industry deserves to be. With the amount of talent and resources we have, we deserve to have that as our objective, not just myself, but all of us, really. We have so many talented people, both cast and crew in Nigeria. That is where we should be aiming at, and certainly on the personal level is where I intended to aim at, with the Milkmaid and with any project that I seek to put my hands to. So when we now talk about Oscars, obviously because of the nature of the film I was making, which was a film set in, the sort of, we didn't really call it Northern Nigeria, we called it rural sub-Saharan Africa, but set in a territory where a local language was going to be spoken and needed to be spoken to represent authentically the characters in that setting. It was obviously clear that if the film was made to a certain equality level, it could and should at least present itself for consideration to represent Nigeria at the Oscars. And so, that was an objective that we held, high as a cardinal value for our production as we embarked on the project.
Your first film went through some censorship issues with the board. Can you speak to that? What were the main issues and how did you negotiate getting your film back online?
Sure. Actually, my first film, I didn't really have any challenges with the censors board. With Render to Caesar, it was a fairly seamless process. It was my most recent film, The Milkmaid, where I think we did have a few issues to resolve, but not with the first film.
Okay. Were those issues about art, or were they about, the region, the region in which the film is based? What were the issues really?
Oh, the issues were really centered more on the perceived depiction of religion and culture and that sort of thematic matter in the film, which, to be fair, we did strive to present as uncompromisingly as possible. So, I think, that seeing such thematic content presented so starkly, and I think was a bit of a shock to the system for them.
Okay, so just a little bit on that same question. So it is the film that you give to the board, and that's what they see, and that's what they will censor or not censor. Do you think, for instance, that it will help if scripts were initially given to the board?
Well, it will certainly help for the board to approve the scripts. Whether it will help those stories creatively is a different matter. But certainly in terms of, if your only objective is just to make sure that you have a painless process, in getting your film classified, then yes, submitting your scripts to the board will certainly help with that. Certainly, the objectivity of the story may be compromised depending on the board's approach to that particular story. But in terms of getting the film get a classification, yes, that will certainly be facilitated by giving the script to the board.
So let's move to a question that just came on the chat. Where would we find the Milkmaid?
Well, the Milkmaid, we did have a couple of very limited releases in November last year, but those were strictly to enable the film be eligible for consideration for the Oscars. Subsequent to that, we've essentially retrieved the film and are just trying to conclude a couple of negotiations that we have with some streaming platforms to show the film. So we're really hoping that within the next 2 to 3 months, we can have the film available on some platform somewhere, for everyone to watch. But that's the current state of play right now.
Okay, thank you. All right, Dr. Ovbiagele, over to you now.
Now, there's a question here from Enehua, I hope I have that correctly, who's asking, how has the pandemic affected you as a filmmaker? And can you shed light on your challenges post the lockdown, especially in regards to distributing and exhibiting your film? The Milkmaid, you have already said something about distribution, but I think now he's concerned about the effect. Has the lockdown slowed things down or no?
No, the lockdown has certainly slowed things down. I mean, obviously on a general level, not being able to have physical meetings hasn't really helped. And I think it's just made the environment generally bearish. A lot of the projections that people would have made in terms of potential income for an upcoming project would have been affected by the fact that cinema houses have been largely closed. Of course, they opened up towards the latter half of the year, but it certainly ensured that a lot of the projects which had been hoping to come on board in the first half of the year had to be pushed to the second half of the year. And of course, that has a knock-on effect for other projects that were planned for the second half of the year, as probably creating a bottleneck effect. So just general bearishness, people, being a bit apprehensive about, the direction in which the world is going, has, probably put a bit of a dampener on things. But for me personally, as a filmmaker, the lockdown helped in the aspect that I was able to develop some ideas that have been brewing in my mind for a while. And perhaps, the hurly-burly process of filmmaking didn't allow me to really double down on and focus on. So during the pandemic, particularly during the lockdown in Nigeria, I was actually able to write a number of scripts, that have been sort of gestating in my mind and hadn't actually been able to focus on. So from that perspective, in terms of writing, it was actually quite helpful for me last year. I've been able to focus and actually write and knock out, some scripts, which I'm actually hoping to get into production sometime this year, at least one of them anyway. So from that perspective, the lockdown was helpful. In terms of distribution and exhibition, it's just taken a bit longer to get a response from some of the parties we are talking to in terms of distributing the film. They are focusing on it, but it's just been a bit more difficult, and things are just generally taking a bit longer than they would have if there were no restrictions in terms of movement.
Right. Well, Anjali has asked a question here. Can you please speak about the budget of the Milkmaid and how the funding was secured?
Well, the budget of the Milkmaid continues to be work in progress because we are still having to spend little bits here and there. Suffice to say that it is not anywhere near the typical budget of a Nigerian film, and it's well over what you say is $500,000. It's more than that, and I don't have the exact figure in my mind, so I can't give an exact figure, but it is definitely beyond that. In terms of how it was put together, from private sources, from personal sources. I mean, I had to tap my own relationship network and people who've known me for several years, and fortunately have imposed some level of confidence and trust in my perhaps personal integrity and my character, as well as my technical competence. And on that basis, were felt able and willing to actually take an investment decision in the project.
Great, thank you. Now, still on the Milkmaid, you said that we're all very much interested in that film. Now, one thing that struck me, I now want to talk a little bit about your vision as a director. One thing that struck me was the scenery, shooting in that beautiful scenery of Taraba State there. And you see the serene scene, the hills stretching out in the distance, the water. And then there's a striking contrast between that peaceful scene, the physical environment, and the actual action that's going on there. So that I found it rather striking. It's almost as if, well, humanity is the one causing all the trouble, whereas the world itself is a peaceful place. Was that a deliberate thing?
Yes,
did you set out to contrapose both things?
Absolutely, that was very deliberate. And I guess the contrast in terrain, the contrast in the topography was just to show, and I said, give a glimpse of what, well, to a certain extent, Nigeria could be, and what Nigeria is to a certain extent. So the peaceful, the topography, the lush hills, the valleys, the greenery and all that, is an aspect of Nigeria that does exist and just waiting, to be tapped and exploited, for the enjoyment of everybody, but everybody is not enjoying that. And the question is why? And the film now shows you part of the reason why we are not able to enjoy and access the full wealth of what the country has available. You have this crisis raging going on in this territory, but the territory itself is innocent, it's harmless, it's beautiful. And really, contrary to what's being experienced there, people should actually be enjoying, that territory, not just the people native to that territory, but even people from other parts of the country should be able to have access to that territory without fear, without any, apprehension, and to be able to interact with the locals and really, really enjoy the country that we have has been given to us. But we're not able to do that, and there are reasons for that. And the film, touches on some of those reasons. So it was important, to be able to show that it's not just that, people are experiencing this so negative in the country, but on the other side of that is this very, very beautiful land that if we can only resolve these continuing issues, this country could be a very, very pleasant place to live.
Right. Now, still on that aspect of your vision as a director, it also struck me that unlike what one might have seen in the film, you did not set out to demonize the Boko Haram or the terrorists, as it were, but you also showed the human aspect. Yes, there were some pretty mean people on that side, but at the same time, one could see that it wasn't all, it's a pure evil. Was that also something deliberate? Was that a means of providing some sort of balance, as it were?
Well, I didn't set out to try and provide balance. What I set out for was authenticity. So however the people really were was what I was aiming to portray in the film. If they were good, let them be good. If they were bad, let them be bad. If there was someone in between, or a little to the left, or a little to the right, as I think Professor Humphrey also said, then present them as that. And so that's what I found as a product of my research, which was, and if you think about it, part of the reason why the extremists are able and continue to be able to attract certain people, to their way of thinking, is the fact that they're not presenting themselves as demons. You can't present yourself as a demon and say, I might be a demon like myself. No. The way you're best able to persuade people to come over to your side is to present yourself as a human being,
to be correct,
with a perceived superior insight into a certain, or a superior understanding of issues that are affecting the people you are trying to reach out to. And that is the way these people present themselves, you understand? And that is the reason why they've had some level of success in winning people over to their brand of ideology. They couldn't do that if they were presenting themselves as murderers and killers strictly. They're presenting themselves as people who hold in their hands a certain ideology that everyone should subscribe to, either willingly or unwillingly, and trying to present reasons why they have to use force, to persuade people that this is the direction in which they should go.
Right, thank you. Just jump back to the chat box here. Tony's asking, getting on Netflix has become a thing. Is that your prime target or the cinemas for this film?
I think, obviously, as one who is looking to produce a return for the investors, I'm looking to exploit the film in the most profitable manner that enables the investors, earn a return on their investment. If it's Netflix, fine. If it's some other platform, fine. So I'm not really particular in terms of what platform or what avenue that should be, as far as it's sufficiently remunerative for the investors in the film. So that's where I stand.
Okay. On the back of that, Anjali is asking, if you say that the BOI's support to the film industry is a fraction, what will be your thoughts on what Netflix is doing with Nollywood in terms of providing funds through licensing or acquiring films? Kunle Afolayan says Netflix is providing funding, so I am merely paraphrasing him. That's a question from Anjali.
Yeah, so Netflix, obviously, from its entry point into licensing films that were already fully funded by the filmmakers and to some extent already exploited, particularly in the cinemas. That's how Netflix came in, essentially licensing films that had primarily already gone through the Nigerian box office. And Netflix started out on that point and then began to want its own proprietary content, and in terms of actually playing on the production side as well, not just distribution. So it's as you said, people like Kunle Afolayan had deals with Netflix, to produce original content for Netflix, and that Netflix has started to sort of dip its toes into that aspect of the value chain of filmmaking, but you still have to compare that to the total quantum of films being made by Nollywood on a yearly basis. And Netflix efforts in that direction still remain, a fraction of the total amount of funds that go into Nigerian films on an annual basis.
Great. Let's now go back in time a little bit. I'd like to talk a little bit about your first film, Render to Caesar. Comparing what you have seen so far with The Milkmaid and what your experience was with Render to Caesar, is there, would you say, certainly then, I mean, there were lessons that you learned from that first film, which you are applying now. Can you give us some insight into that? What are the things that you say, well, were really challenging at that time, especially since it was your first film, and things that you say, yes, have helped in improving the processes that you have applied now to this second film?
No, certainly, obviously, one would hope. I mean, the distance between when I shot Render to Caesar and when I shot the second one, The Milkmaid, was probably about 6 years. In that intervening period, yes, obviously, I learned a lot. I took away a lot of lessons from what I learned on Render to Caesar. I was just stepping into the industry then. I was probably a bit more conservative, still trying to find my feet, still trying to understand, yes, what people wanted, both as a local audience as well as an international audience. Render to Caesar I was fortunate with that film to be able to travel to a number of international film festivals where the film played. I was able to understand the reactions to the film. I was also able to watch films from my contemporaries in other countries and see how they made their films and see how people responded to their films as well. So all that sort of insight, was valuable to me in terms of, taking that, harnessing that, and putting that into my next production, which was The Milkmaid. Having had some understanding in terms of what was possible, and also seeking to, I guess, to be a bit more ambitious in terms of, because, sometimes you can get a little conservative in terms of filmmaking in Nigeria just because you're trying to be a bit risk averse and trying not to, step into territories that are a bit risky and this and that. With The Milkmaid, I mean, that was certainly production-wise was considerably more risky. I shooting Render to Caesar. I shot Render to Caesar in Lagos State. It was a bit more of a comfort zone than shooting Milkmaid. Sure. We were stepping out of Lagos and going to the Northeast itself and shooting in what one would consider to be the theater of conflict, with the Northeastern states and what they were going through at that time and continue to go through right now.
Yes, actually, I mean, I also heard about some of that experience, that some of the crew actually ran into faced some violent reaction on the part of the populace there, who mistook them for terrorists as well. And then also I read about the challenge of the actual transportation of the equipment and all of that stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, obviously, we were trying to get the best possible hands and the best possible equipment to use on the production. Now, that is not an issue if I'm shooting in Lagos, because a lot of times the best possible hands and the best equipment are located in Lagos, or proximate to Lagos. But if you're shooting in the Northeast, as you said, it's got beautiful topography and all that, but those areas are deficient in the resources that are required to make film happen to the quality level that you're aiming at. So you now have a logistical issue to resolve, transporting the resources, human and material and technical and physical, from where they're located and situated to the shooting location. So essentially, we had to relocate and shift manpower and equipment from Lagos to the extreme eastern part of the country, which is Taraba State. And having to wind your way with heavy trucks from Lagos, passing through the southeast, to end up in Taraba State, was where the challenge was, because you're passing through, as you know, a number of, sort of black spots, where security isn't as tight as it should be. And we happened to, one of our trucks happened to land not on a black spot, but happened to land arrive at a location where, by the time they inspected, some of the very authentic costumes that we had to portray this film about terrorists, unfortunately, the way rumors fly, the word spread around that, these people were actually the terrorists who had struck coincidentally that particular locale that had been affected by, violence just 2 days prior, and it was a very traumatic period, both for our crew who are on the scene, as well as ourselves who are waiting for them to arrive in Taraba State.
Wow, that was a tough one. Were there any other challenges? And you would like to know what the key learning points have been for you as a filmmaker, and whether there were other challenges that you faced with The Milkmaid. How long did the shoot last, for instance?
Well, there are a number of challenges. I mean, one, I'm shooting a film that doesn't have a single word of English. I'm shooting a film in Hausa, Fulde, and in Arabic, none of which languages I speak. And I need to direct actors who are much more comfortable in those languages than in English. So one, I needed to get the script accurately translated from English, in which I wrote it, into those languages, and to do that accurately. And then secondly, now directing actors in those languages and making sure that what the characters they are portraying and the language and dialogue they are delivering in front of camera adhere to the script I've written. So it probably took us twice as long to shoot the film as it would have if it was an English language film, simply because, I don't speak those languages, and I needed to, every step of the way, cross-check and make sure that they were delivering authentically what was in the script. So that was one. Two, I'm shooting in, Taraba State. Unfortunately, I was shooting in the rainy season in Taraba State for a film that had a lot of exterior scenes. So we were considerably affected by the weather, and several times had to shut down production and wait for either a rainstorm or a sandstorm to blow past before you can resume shooting. So you had all these little things and factors that are contributing to just prolonging the tenor of the shoot. So yeah, it was certainly challenging having to contend with these factors.
It sounds pretty challenging, really. Especially, I would say, the language aspect. Okay. Now, sorry, I was just reading here a question from AJ Peters. I will just read it out. It's a bit long, but he says, I am a cinema manager with the biggest and foremost cinema in Nigeria. And every time cinema goers come to see a movie, over 90% of them don't want to see our titles. And with a passion, I'll be playing my part in changing this narrative as I launch into production myself. Now, as a veteran in the movie industry, what are those aspects of our production that need to be improved upon and creatively deployed in order to compete with our counterparts, particularly in Hollywood?
I think it's a great question. Virtually every single element along the value chain of filmmaking in Nigeria, in Hollywood, needs to be improved. And I guess that goes for any film industry, but particularly in Hollywood, because I think to some extent we have a tendency as filmmakers in Nigeria to think that, what I've done is good enough, or we've arrived, and sometimes the focus, I'm not saying for everybody, but sometimes the focus can be more on the glitz and the glamour and all that, as opposed to the craft of filmmaking, which is, if you've written a script and the script isn't ready, stay there and don't mobilize to production, don't mobilize financial resources, make sure that that script is ready. Many times we just rush scripts into production because we just want to have a film produced, we want to start to make money, we want to say we have a film, we want to walk the red carpet and do premieres. But Hollywood doesn't work that way. Hollywood scripts sometimes spend years before they are finally greenlit. into production, and they make sure they pass through that process, multiple rewrites until they feel comfortable that they've gotten the absolute best they can out of that story before you get to production. Because if you falter at the script stage, there's no amount of magic you do in production or post-production that will pull a rabbit out of the hat. If the script is faulty, the film will be faulty. So the very first step is to get the blueprint, which is what the script is, to get the script as right as it can be. And once you've done that, then you can now start to proceed into the other elements that are equally required to not compromise on in order to be able to achieve anywhere near the sort of quality level that Hollywood has. So you're talking about casting. And again, it's one of the issues that, has been commented on for Nigerian films, particularly when we travel with them abroad. And you have international audiences watching Nigerian films, and you see that what flies with us as Nigerians doesn't fly abroad. They find sometimes that acting to be a bit too theatrical, it's a bit too obvious, too on the nose. They don't find the sort of subtlety and nuances that they are more accustomed to, and is more, digestible for them. So our films quite frequently are not as readily accepted abroad as they are in our own cinema houses. So if we're talking about wanting to produce films that can stand shoulder to shoulder, not just in the perception of international audiences, but even in the perception of Nigerian audiences, then we need to pay very close attention to these technical and creative elements that are required to ensure that our films can at least compete with Hollywood films. So I think on some other levels, we've made a bit more strides than in some others. So in terms of cinematography, Nigerian films have certainly upped their game. We are using much more sophisticated cameras to shoot our films than we were, say, a decade ago. So that helps. We're a bit more knowledgeable in terms of things like green screens for VFX and such other elements that are required to produce more ambitious films. We're not there yet, but we're a bit more literate in those elements than we were before. But we still have a considerable way to go in storytelling, at the script stage, in our acting as well. We have some ways to go in our production design, in our editing, in our sound. These are elements sometimes where we don't pay very close attention to the way Hollywood does their work, and we need to. You understand? If you're doing a film and you're doing sound design for a film, and you have two characters talking, and the only thing you can hear is their audio. You don't hear any ambience, you don't hear any Foley and all that. Your film will sound very different from a Hollywood film, who pay much more attention to those details. And even in terms of the process of recording sound on location, you need to have a sound recordist who is extremely meticulous in ensuring that there's no interference, that will now jeopardize a film in the post-production stage. So these are some of the things that contribute to narrowing that gap between Nigerian films and Hollywood films.
Could much of this, if not all of this, not be traced to what is really a large gap for us, which is that there's a limited number of educational institutions that actually offer training in all of these areas, because that still remains something that one could say is missing. We have so many people wanting to get into the industry, but then you look at the numbers of places where they can actually go to get a decent training, and there are quite a few. Don't you think that perhaps is one of the bigger problems that we have?
It's definitely one of the bigger problems. Certainly with the great work you guys are doing at Hollywood Studies Center, hopefully that gap can continue to be narrowed, but much more, needs to be done. So that's on the one hand. We need many more educational institutions and platforms that can educate Nigerian filmmakers in terms of best practice globally. So that's one. But then in addition to that, then there also needs to be the will on the part of the filmmakers to actually avail themselves of such knowledge. Because, as I said, for myself, I didn't reach out for structured education, but I had the will within myself to at least learn and try and narrow that gap on a personal level. And I'm not saying I'm there yet, but at least the will was present on my part to step out and try and find out what is best practice and what is my own practice, and to try and narrow that gap as much as I could. But if that will is not there, you could have 10 world-class education establishments in Nigeria, and filmmakers still will not avail themselves, or at least invest in the time and the financial resources to get that knowledge to put into their films, and they just walk off and do what they want to do. So that will also needs to be present on the part of the filmmakers themselves to actually, they need to have an appreciation for best practice, and that's not automatic. Some people really don't care. Some people just want to make money, or they just want the glitz and the glamour, and they don't actually want to actually learn the best way to do what they're doing. I'm not saying that's everybody, but we all need to have that mindset if the industry is to achieve its full potential.
Very good point. Very good point. Now, Anion is asking, do you see any parallels with your film, The Milkmaid, and Adekunle Nodash's Delivery Boy, which also has elements of terrorism in addition to other contemporary themes?
Well, I haven't actually watched Delivery Boy. I'm aware of it. I've been aware of some of the the accolades it's received and all that, but the film itself I haven't watched. I am aware though that in terms of thematic content, it does have some parallels with The Milkmaid. And again, one applauds it. One applauds the courage to be able to tell alternative storylines. And when I say alternative to what you typically see amongst Nigerian films in the cinema. Okay,
great. Then Tony's asking, watching other films from other countries, I would like to know what you watch, from where, why, and do you have any favorite directors or national cinemas? In other words, he's asking what is your taste in films, apart from the ones that you make.
My taste in films, my taste in films is probably, I like films that have very good story. I like films that have a very healthy balance between plot and characterizations. So I like those elements to be strongly present in whatever I watch. I won't say I'm huge on things like action films or superhero films. Those are good, but to be honest, I probably don't gravitate very much towards those. I just like films that have, they just have to be able to move me. They have to have very compelling storylines. They have to have very compelling actors. I'm really very big on acting performances. I'm thrilled when I see great acting performances, and any films that hold out the prospect of that are films I'd naturally gravitate towards. In terms of directors, I don't have any esoteric names to mention. They're probably names everybody knows and whose films they've watched. I watch films Martin Scorsese. I watch films by Steven Spielberg, by Alfred Hitchcock, and obviously these are very acclaimed and accomplished filmmakers. And watching their films, certainly is very inspiring in terms of me addressing my own films that I'd like to do. So I try to learn lessons from the way they go about their craft, and hopefully infuse elements of their approach, to the way I like to tell my own stories.
Great. Then Zainab wants to know, do you think Netflix, being in Nigeria, will help contribute to the amount of young people who watch Nigerian content?
I think it would, because Netflix, just by their entry into Nigeria and by the standards that they are setting in front of Nigerian filmmakers, because Netflix, as much as it's looking to acquire Nigerian content, also has its own brand to protect and doesn't want to lower its own standard just to accommodate Nigerian filmmakers. So by default, Nigerian filmmakers have been forced to a certain extent to up their game technically and creatively in order to facilitate acceptance of their content on the Netflix platform. And once Nigerian filmmakers start to do that, I think that would naturally translate into more patronage of their products by the average Nigerian.
Great. Then I have one, probably my last question. well, let me say it was a disappointment for me. You know, the film, the Milkmaid did not go as far as we would have liked at the Oscars. However, in one of the sessions of the Filmmakers Forum, which we had with Mahmoud Balogun, he stressed the point that taking a film to the Oscars is not just the business of the filmmaker himself, but he stressed that the support of the government was especially important because a lot of campaigning needed to be done, which required a lot of funding, etc. Now, what was your experience in that aspect? Do you feel that you got sufficient support, or was it really more like it was your thing without really that wider support that could have helped to push things a bit further?
Well, thank you. I'll answer, could we have received more support? Definitely we could. We definitely could. We were basically on our own. There really weren't too many people trying to say, hey guys, you're representing Nigeria now. Can we sit down and put heads together and see how we can really push this thing as far as possible? Really, no one came. We're basically just doing things as best as we could. So in terms of support, no doubt. Your film, any film representing its country at the international stage is a huge opportunity for that country in particular to be able to burnish its international reputation. And we try to reach out to people to express our position on this, that, forget who is behind the film. Whether we like it or not, the film is out there representing Nigeria the same way, you travel to abroad and maybe you enter into a taxi and the taxi driver asks you what country you're from. And you say, oh, from Nigeria. I say, oh, Nigeria or Kocha, Wako Kanu. You understand? And that is probably the most direct contact they're going to have with your country. So you represent your country at the Oscars. Just your film being out there and being watched by Academy Award members, that may be the closest encounter they're going to have with your country. And I think the responsibility is to put your best foot forward and present what's representing your country in the most positive light. It's an opportunity, really, to burnish your brand, your reputation as a country, So we try to express that to as many people as we could. And obviously it's still work in progress. I hope that this year, lessons learned from last year, will be infused, into the support given to whichever film is selected to present Nigeria this year. But having said that, another thing that we also need, the Academy Award is not, is the Academy process and selection process is not just about the quality of the film that you have. There's politics everywhere. And you have to be able to understand the game and position yourself to play the game as persuasively as you can. Other countries are far more conversant with the language of an Oscar campaign than Nigeria is. And I think we didn't do badly, for our very first nomination or selection last year. But what we should be determined to do this year is to be improved and build on the lessons learned from last year. Now, if you look at the various African films that submitted, films for consideration by the Academy last year, and there were probably about 10 to 15 African countries, including Nigeria, who submitted films. Our film, The Milkmaid from Nigeria, was probably the only African film that was represented by a single country. So if you look at the film that actually made it to the final 5, which I think was from Tunisia, you'll find that that film was co-produced by no less than 10 countries.
Wow.
So if you look at that film, you find that there are about 10 countries involved in producing and distributing that film. The Milkmaid had only one company, which is my production, basically. And each of the other African films that submitted, each of the other African countries that submitted films, you'd find that almost invariably, each of them had no less than 3 to 4 countries that joined hands together to produce that film. Nigeria was the only film that had one single, that was strictly from Nigeria with no co-production. All the other countries had co-productions, some 3, some 4, 7, some 10.
Okay.
So those are the sort of things, by the time you have such resources at your disposal from different countries, it's easier for you once you step into the international arena to make your voice heard. We were trying to shout from our little platform here in Nigeria that, no, here we are, the Milkmaid, please watch our film, like us, whatever it is. All these other films had, multiple sources speaking at various angles and in various places to the same voter base we were trying to reach out to. I'm not saying that's the reason why we weren't selected, but it helps. Yes. And it's certainly a striking statistic that out of, say, 10 African countries, it was only from Nigeria that you had a single that was strictly produced by that country, and not other countries collaborated to produce that film.
Yes. Well, that is quite insightful. It backs up very much what Mahmoud Balogun told us, that to take a film that far, it needs to be heavily funded. Yeah, and of course, that is beyond the capacities of just an individual. Okay, well, we have a few more questions here. And there's one from Chokofunyanya in which he's asking, will indigenous content, that is epic Nollywood content, be a welcome for Netflix, as more and more Nollywood content on Netflix is Western?
Indigenous content will be welcome on Netflix to the extent that they meet the sort of production values that Netflix insists they adhere to. Now, the reason, for whatever reason, Nigerian filmmakers seem to invest more resources in the Western styled and themed films than they do for indigenous content, probably because they feel it's easier for them to make their money back from Western style films than it is from indigenous themed films. So indigenous films in Nigeria tend to suffer from a lack of resources, certainly the sort of financial resources that are required to enable them be accepted by Netflix. So, I think, indigenous films may continue to have challenges being accepted by Netflix until you find people who are willing to invest the sort of financial resources required to bring them up to the production values required by Netflix.
Good point. Well, Inkem is asking some questions here about piracy. What problem, she says, did producers face regarding piracy in the traditional age that's present in this digital age? It's difficult to track piracy in this age, given the ease with which persons can digitally share files. Are there any known technologies operative in Nigeria to track digital piracy or traditional forms of piracy, or technologies to circumvent such?
I'm sure there are. There are various ways. I mean, as filmmakers, you try to put various digital marks to identify whatever copy of your film you're submitting to various places, such that if the film is pirated, you can identify and trace, where that film came from. You understand? But yeah, so those are sort of things that filmmakers try to do, to try, at least try, if the cat is let out of the bag, to discover who let the cat out of the bag, so to speak. But yeah, piracy continues to be an issue. And obviously a lot of filmmakers have gravitated away from the traditional, medium of piracy, which was DVDs, and obviously are looking to exploit their proprietary content much more within cinema houses, and obviously increasingly on streaming platforms, Africa Magic, Netflix, Roku TV, and all that. So the situation of piracy is probably more reduced with the emergence of those platforms, but is not entirely eliminated.
Right. Okay, then one last question here about the criteria of Netflix. Is it are the Netflix criteria publicly known? And Ken would like to. Oh, no, that's Tony. Tony would like to ask.
I don't think they're as publicly available as they could be and perhaps should be. Certainly those who act as agents for Netflix in Nigeria, those who act as aggregators, are obviously much more competent in terms of exactly what is required, for your film to qualify to be on Netflix. So, but I'm not sure to what extent those agents and aggregators have disseminated, that information to the rank and file of filmmakers.
Right.
And probably it would be nice to have that information more publicly disseminated, to the benefit of both the aggregators themselves and filmmakers. So probably conferences and symposiums and probably forums like this sort of chat we're having could probably help, to actually disseminate, that information to the general public and filmmakers in particular.
Yes, on that point, actually, we had here with us at the last session of the forum, Mr. Moses Babatope, and he actually spoke about some of this criteria because Film One is one of the aggregators for Netflix, and so that he told us quite a bit about some of these points that they look out for in the films that they put together. Well, our time is just about up, Desmond. Thank you so very much for sharing all of this with us. I'm sure that I am not the only one who will be looking forward to seeing The Milkmaid in the cinemas and on other platforms. It's long awaited. And well, we wish you every success when it does become available for general public viewing. And I think from what you say, we should also be looking forward to another film from you before the year runs out, at least the beginning of production. And we look forward to inviting you back to tell us all about that one. But can you drop us a hint of some sort? Are you going to be doing something similar to any of your previous two films, or are you doing something different? Just a hint.
Well, I mean, I like the projects I work on to speak to issues in my environment, particularly issues which I feel are not attracting as much public attention as they should. So certainly my next projects, and indeed the projects I like to work on, definitely do touch on issues of topical interest to my environment. So yes, my next film will probably be along similar veins, particularly along the vein of The Milkmaid. It might not be in Hausa, but certainly be an issue that has some level of topical interest, both locally and internationally.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We will look forward to that one. Well, thank you all for being with us today in this session. It's been a very insightful one, like some of you have already indicated in the chat box. I think we've all enjoyed this tremendously. So thank you for being with us. And thank you once again, Desmond. We will look forward to having you with us soon, very soon indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. All the best. Thank you. Thank you, Desmond. Okay. All the best, everyone.